welcome back. So it's another Mistresses of the Monarch video, and this one's going to be all about Alice Perez. Now, she was really despised by the people of the royal court. Now, whether this was due to jealousy or whether she was actually a really horrible person, we don't know, because the only accounts we're getting are really from people that didn't like her. So Alice, she has been portrayed as intelligent but also very ugly, and that she manipulated King Edward III, taking him for all he had, and in the process becoming one of the most wealthiest women in England. So we don't know for sure when Alice was born because the records don't exist, but some people have said she was born in like 1340, others in 1348, so she was probably born in the 1340s at some point. The surname of her family was Salisbury, and they worked as goldsmiths. So Alice married Janin Perez. Now, he was apprenticed to her family in 1342, so that meant he was a bit older than her, and he ended up becoming a member of the Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths. Now, in 1359, Janin had done some work at the royal court, and he is mentioned in a court document as "our beloved Janin Perez, our jeweler." So it was around this time that he and Alice married. But their marriage did not last long, as Janin died either in 1361 or 1362. So after her husband's death, Alice actually became a member of Queen Philippa of England's household. She had probably come to the notice of Queen Philippa because she most likely accompanied her husband to the royal court when he became their jeweler. So being one of the Queen's ladies in waiting meant that Alice came into close proximity with King Edward III. They started a relationship, with their first child being born in 1364. So because we don't actually know when Alice was definitely born, when she started a relationship with the king, she would have been between 18 and 24 years old. What we do know was that King Edward was around 55, 56 years old when their relationship started. So in the space of 3 years, Alice and Edward had 3 children together: John, Joan and Jane. At this point, they were just plodding along, being king and mistress, but in 1369, Queen Philippa died. Devastated by the death of his wife, Edward turned to Alice for comfort and support, and she became his chief advisor. Now, she used his position of influence over him to interfere in the courts of law to secure favourable sentences for her friends or for people who had given her money to do so. So after his wife's death, Edward gave Alice some of Queen Philippa's jewels, and he even overrid her will to give her jewels that Philippa had intended for someone else. Now, while Philippa had been alive, Edward and Alice had been discreet with their relationship, but now that she was dead, they weren't so much. At a tournament, Alice sat next to the king in public in what should have been the Queen's spot. Now, people were shocked like this because etiquette said that if the Queen was unable to attend a function with the king, then her spot would either have been taken by the heir's wife or one of the king's daughters. It should not have been taken by a mistress. So apparently Edward demanded that Alice be dressed in golden clothes, and that she was to be paraded around town, and that everyone was to behave respectfully towards her. But this caused lots of criticism, not just from the royal court, but also from the general public. So with all the gifts that Edward was giving her, Alice became a very rich woman. She became so rich that people were borrowing money off of her. When she was at her most powerful, she owned 56 manors, castles and townhouses across England, and only 15 of these were actually gifts from the king. The rest of them she had brought herself. So as Alice's power and influence at the royal court grew, people really began to hate her. They said that she was ambitious and calculating, and that she was manipulating an elderly, ill king into doing what she wanted. So in 1375, Edward was becoming rather ill, and it was obvious that he wasn't really going to last much longer. So Alice secretly married William de Windsor, who was the king's lieutenant in Ireland. This was clever of her, because it meant that after the king's death, then she would be secure because she would have a husband. But they sort of had to do it in secret, because while Edward was still alive, he possibly would not have allowed her to marry. So to make sure that their marriage remained a secret, William spent a lot of time away from the English court. But secrets don't stay secret for long, and soon rumours were going around saying that Alice and William were married. So Edward heard these rumours and he was upset about them, but both Alice and William denied that they were married, and he must have believed them because he kept Alice around as his mistress. By 1736, the court had become really fed up with Alice. So they put an ordinance in place that set penalties for women who interfered with the due process of the law by taking bribes and trying to influence people. It was aimed at Alice, but they basically had to include it for all women just to make it fair. Alice was called before Parliament, where she was charged with corruption. She was found guilty of this and had all her lands confiscated, and then she was banished. Reluctant Edward was forced to exile Alice, but she was soon allowed back. So Edward was forced to exile Alice, but she was soon allowed to return back to the court by John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, who was one of Edward's sons. She was there when King Edward died in 1377, and apparently after he had died, or while he was dying, she was there taking the rings off his fingers. But this might not be true. This could just be someone making it up to discredit her. So the new king, Edward's grandson, Richard II, was forced to put Alice on trial again. She was found guilty of interfering with state business and exiled again. But Alice did not leave this time. Her and her husband William found a little loophole. In 1378, William told the court that he and Alice had married before Edward had died. So actually, she should not have been tried as an independent woman. Alice was actually pardoned for not leaving the country and instead was given into the custody of her husband. She kind of managed to regain her lands, but not really, because her lands were actually given to her husband. So she had them back again, but through him. William died in 1384 and she was now an independent woman again. William had left some of his land and some of Alice's lands in a trust which may have been meant to support her, but she was not the main beneficiary of his will. That was his nephew. If the idea was for the nephew to use the trust to help Alice, then he did not keep up this deal. Alice ended up taking legal action to try and get her lands back. Now, this action lasted until she died, and then it was taken over by her daughters. Alice died during the winter of 1400-1401. She is buried in Upminster in East London, and it is said that Geoffrey Chaucer, the author of the Canterbury Tales, actually based his character, the wife of Bath, on her. So that was the story of the life of Alice Perez, the mistress of King Edward III of England. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.